the next thing we're going to do is to go over Chapter 7. We'll go over the material that's in the chapter. That should take some time, somewhere around a half an hour or so. All right? That's all I plan on doing for today. I don't know about you, but I'm just spent, for lack of better words. So tomorrow we will do both of the exercises, the one for Chapter 6, the one for Chapter 7. And they're good because they dovetail on one another. Basic. What's that? The end of chapter thing, the one that you've been turning in. But this is a new one. We're not working with that price quotation anymore. We're doing that reservation system. I will be giving each and every one of you a starter file. And then, because it's got the images and stuff in it that you'll use, and then we'll go from there. All right? And then Friday, so Friday's your time, you know, if you're behind on anything or whatever. I do believe that Mr. Corrigan is going to be in here for the class when you guys start. He usually leaves at 2:30. I don't know what that means because I've never taken a day off before. It may mean that if he leaves at 2:30, you know, that he may ask Paul, Mr. Knott, to come in here till 4:30. But if he doesn't and he leaves at 2:30, whether or not you leave, there's no one here. I don't think Paul's going to be watching you. All right? And I don't do things like that anyway. I don't know if you even know this, but there are cameras at the institution. Like, there is a camera, and one of the reasons they do that is not for you guys, but for us. If I decided, let's say I was teaching a night class, and it was 6 to 10, and I decided at 8 o'clock every night I was too tired and I was letting you go, they have visual proof then that I'd be doing it. That kind of thing. So, but so that'll be Friday. So what you do is up to you, for lack of better words. And if nothing else, you'll be able to finish. If you don't get a chance to finish the chapters 6 and 7 exercises that we'll do tomorrow, you can work on them on Friday. I'd like those hopefully by Monday. Okay? Then on Monday, we will go over Chapter 8, one of the harder chapters in the book. It's on session state and it's on cookies. I don't know. We'll see how long the lecture takes. If there's time, we'll do the lecture and the practice. Otherwise, we'll just do the lecture. But either Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, then you'll have your next test. All right? No later than Wednesday, because on Thursday and Friday, all I'm going to do both those days is we're going to have time to go over Chapter 9. Those are master pages. And I do want to have plenty of time to spend on those because they're funky, for lack of better words. All right? It's like you create a template that you base the other pages off of. Then the following week, we'll go through chapters 10 and 11. Again, chapter 10 is on bootstrap, and chapter 11 is, I don't remember. Chapter 11, oh, that's at friendly URLs. All right, then we'll have another test, and then we're ready to go into the database stuff. I'm hoping, I checked during the break, she still hasn't gotten a hold of me. All right. When I go home tonight.
We did tell her a week ago.
Yeah.
Or that's the scenario.
Yeah. But see, with her, she made sure that the day before we were coming, she sent me an email saying, "I haven't heard from you. Are you still coming?" But when she left, when I walked out with her, I walked her out to the bottom of the steps here. I said, "If there's any problems, I'll email you. Otherwise, you can just expect we'll be there." Well, and that's okay. So I will just get back. You know, I might even try calling her. So, all right. So if you're following along in the book, we're on page, it looks like 245 approximately. And again, you can be guaranteed that at least one of the validators we have not talked about yet. So we have talked about 3 of the 6 validators. We have talked about the required validator. All right, we have talked about the range validator, and we've also talked about the compare, because I screwed up and kept calling the range the compare. All right, but on your next test, there will be either a compare validator and or a regular expression validator and or a custom validator. In addition, in some form or other, on one of the forms or the other, you can be guaranteed there will be a validation summary. I'm just telling you that that stuff will be in there. All right? So they go through some examples for about the first 20 pages, and then the last 7 or 8, they go through that same checkout page that they talked about previously, and they talk about adding the validation controls. Now again, we've seen validation controls before. We've actually been using them, and I like to introduce them as soon as possible, because then when we get to this chapter, you already know half the stuff that's in there. All right. Okay, the question is, what would you use custom for? Let's assume for a second that you anything that you just about anything you do with a custom validator, just about, you can do with a regular expression validator. So let's say, for example, that I had a form where you had to put in a part number, and that part number had to be 2 numbers followed by 2 letters followed by 2 numbers. I could make a custom validator for that, or I could do a regular expression validator for that. All right? I can tell you that unless I can come up with something really good, but I don't think so, I don't think there'll be a custom validator on your test. Okay? You already know this about the if page dot is valid, so we've talked about that. Again, things like this, I don't feel the need to go over anymore. I'm going to expect you're going to put them on your tests. And if for some reason you left them off of a test, you're going to add them back. All right? Well, you can, but they have some built-in stuff too.
Okay.
All right, we're going to look at that in just a second. All right. Now notice this is on the bottom of page 247 in this big bulletized list. If a browser has JavaScript enabled, the validation controls do their validation on the client. What's cool about that is those validation controls write JavaScript code for you. That's what happens if you've got it set up for working on the client. All right. And remember, even though we haven't been really concerned with that because we've been setting our validation on our unobtrusive to none, typically when you validate both on the client and on the server. All right. That's just considered the standard way of doing things. And that's what they mentioned that in here. So, all right. How to set the properties. Many of these we've already looked at. Control to validate. You know what that is. I've forgotten a few times, and you've called me on it. That's good. Display. All right. Static and dynamic. Okay, we've looked at those before. The text, which is the text displayed on the validator, we've worked with that. We've worked with the error message. All right. We've worked with CSS class. The enabled is an important one. I mentioned that to you before. While you're testing, you may decide you want to turn off the validation. You can do it simply by going into the enabled property and setting enable to false. All right. Always make sure you turn it back on again, okay, before you actually go live with it. All right. Enable client script. Notice, indicates whether the validation will be done on the client. So you have to, if you say what's the default, they don't tell, and I don't remember. Set focus on error. Indicates whether the focus will be moved to the control if it's invalid. Kind of a nicety where you can jump to the control if they screwed up something. All right. Validate. What's that?
Would you rather do enable client script? I mean, just try to keep it on their side?
No, what I said before is typically the way you validate is you always validate on the client first, then you send it out to the server. And most of the same tests you run on the client, you'll run again on the server. And the reason that you do that is it is possible for someone to either A, turn JavaScript off, or B, spoof it so they think that all their client-side stuff worked even when it didn't. That's not actually that hard to do. But it's much harder to do on the server because you have less control on the server.
The default for that is true.
The default is true? Okay, thank you. Yeah, these probably are most of the defaults right here, I would guess. But you're right. Okay. Okay, so we've looked at this before, but it says, in Chapter 2, you were introduced to unobtrusive validation. When it's used, The validation on the client uses jQuery. That's what you're doing, is you're forcing it. How do I know that? Remember what we were bringing in, that we brought in that ASP.net.something.jQuery? Script manager, thank you, .jQuery. And we were doing that because that brought in the jQuery library. One thing I'm going to be doing with the students this semester that I didn't do with you guys, I wish I would have, is we went over a couple chapters in last year in JavaScript. I'm not even going over with them this year. They've got the same book you hated. But we're also, we're going to skip a couple chapters and we're going to do the jQuery chapter. All right, and those tapes will be out there if anybody ever wants to look at them. All right.
When will we be able to use Bootstrap 4 with
You actually can now. You mean in this class or period?
just in the ASP?
You can use it now in ASP. You can, but when you do that, the Bootstrap class we've been bringing in, you bring in the other one, then you can. The problem with that is virtually everything in this book assumes Bootstrap 3. That's why I didn't want to go into 4, because I thought people might find it confusing. That was why. All right. It says, even though unobtrusive validation is on by default when you start a new web app, it has been turned off in all the application that you've studied so far. All right. Figure 7.3 shows the easiest way to implement it. That is by installing the NuGet package. You already know how to do that.
Are there things like NuGet packages in Java that like use like Oracle or
Again, when you're working in Java server pages, which is the equivalent of this in Java, yes. In the Java that we're doing, we're not going to be doing Java server pages. We're going to be using Java like we use just C#.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, I don't think we have to go over this because we've already talked about how to install the NuGet package for jQuery validation. You've already done it.
And we'd be doing PHP done with Java, right?
What's that?
We'd be doing like PHP if we'd done Java.
Yeah, if I mean, again, I've talked to Evan and them here, and they are of the mindset that the number of languages that we're giving you is good for this program. Where I taught at Blackhawk, they probably got double the languages you did, but sometimes I had a feeling they were miles wide and inches deep because we didn't get a chance to really go into a lot of depth and breadth of coverage on a lot of this stuff.
Right. Well, you can inherit, stuff from.
Well, yeah, when you learn, a lot of it's just logic, and once you learn logic, then it's just a matter of syntax. The author even mentions here that there's the new jQuery, and jQuery 3 is available. There's also the new Bootstrap, which the author doesn't mention there. So, next they talk about each validator. The first is the required field validator. Not really that much that you need to know about it. All right. Now, see this example that they show here, though? We don't have this, but if we had like a drop-down list that had states in there, let's say, or let's use the one that we just did here. You had a drop-down list that had what in it? It had, for example, for the years, it had 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50, correct? There would have been nothing to stop us from putting in there as the first thing in our drop-down list outside of that for loop. We could have put in there, please choose the years. All right? Why would you want to do that? Because then we could use that initial value as please choose a year. And if it was still set to please choose a year, we'd know they hadn't made a choice yet. All right? Why do I tell you that? Because it's amazing the number of places that when you look at forms that are online on the internet, they don't say please choose a state. And if you're whipping through there really quickly and you don't know what you're doing, you choose Alabama because it's the first one in there. All right?
And then you could clear it to that. It would make sense.
Well, I mean, if I was trying to write a really smart app, I might try to see, and I don't know how much of this it would even be possible to do, but I might check and see if I could. Like I said, this is possible, but I don't know how long it would take and how complex it would be. But if you get on, I would try to go and check based on your IP address and find out where you are right now, and I would set it basically to that. I mean, that's just a smart thing to do, but it's not as simple as it sounds. And what do you do for people who start doing an order in one state, maybe they're right on a borderline, then they go to another state. Like with me, I'm going to take this computer with me when I leave on Thursday night. So I'll be in, I'll you know, in fact, on Saturday morning before I come back, I'm probably going to drive to Milwaukee to visit my father. So I'm actually going to be in 3 different states, that kind of thing. So, yeah, you're right. Yeah. So I think we understand the required field validator. I think we understand the compare validator. And you all know now that when you use the compare validator, probably the most important one for you to remember is that type. All right. We've done the range, but I mentioned the compare one to you. And I said that most often where you would use this, and you've all seen this, password, repeat password type of thing. And typically they have that, you know, not, sometimes they have it for logging in, but usually it's when you want to change your password. Because if you type, you know, do you know why they do that? Why they have you put it in twice? Well, no, but it typically is because it's amazing the number of people who think they typed in one thing into a password, and then they type it in the repeat, and it says they don't match. Because you try typing one or both in too quickly.
Yeah, and it's protected, so they can't really see it.
Yeah.
You know,
And well, that depends. It depends on the type of encryption the place has set up. A lot of places, when you tell them that you lost your password, they'll maybe send you a temporary one, but they can't give you yours. That's because the encryption method that they're using, literally they can't see it.
Sorry, I didn't mean that. I meant like just like you like as in just having the dots, you know,
Yeah.
or the asterisks or whatever it is, and then people just forget.
Yeah.
You know.
There are places, I mean, I can't remember where, but someplace I changed it might be for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel that I get online. They did something where I'd forgotten my password. So I put it in again, and they actually had an option there that said, show. And when I clicked that, it actually showed me typing that in.
What's the deal with that? What kind of validation is that where it's like, are you a robot or something, you know?
Oh, that's called a CAPTCHA. They're doing that because the reason that they're doing that is because people can write routines that will automatically do stuff, but they can't write a routine that will automatically push that button for them. That's why they do it. And if it's not that for Are You a Robot, then it's, you know, they show, you know, the one I hate is when they show you like a picture that's broken up into like 9 little frames, and they say which one of these has a sign on it. And one of them you don't know because it's got a real little piece of a sign, and you put it in or you don't put it in. Those are so stupid.
Hard to tell sometimes.
Yeah. But there's a whole art to doing those CAPTCHAs. So the value to compare,
There's a repository for it somewhere.
I'm sure there is, yeah. The value to compare, like for example, this would be the repeat password, the operator would be equal, the control to compare would be the original password, and the type here would be string. All right? Again, I think everybody gets it. The range validator is the one, again, you have used, minimum, maximum, and type. One thing, I think it's important, maybe not everybody agrees with this, but when you're working with this stuff, if you are writing a program that's going to be using numeric and non-numeric values, it's going to be using both non-currency values and currency values, and you're going to be mixing them, that's when I tend to use double all the time. All right, not everybody agrees with that. All right, and again, there are examples of all these in there too. The regular expression, kind of what you'd asked about, but let's just get into it a little bit more. All right, when you bring up the regular expression editor dialog box, it has about a half dozen or so, or a dozen maybe, built in. And it's the ones you'd use most often. Social Security number, United States phone number, zip code. What's that? No, it does some, but I don't think it does every language. All right, there are ways, I'm sure that there are, you know, that Microsoft has add-ins that you can put in where it would do more. All right. But notice it literally writes that expression for you. That's what, come on, get off of there. So if you click phone number, it'll do that. All right. And if you say, well, I don't want that one, you could always do a custom one then, if you wanted to. All right. You should know now, looking at something like this, that's 5 digits. Right there. \D means 5 digits. And if you make it a capital D, it means 5 things, none of which can be a digit. All right. And I think this is what Ethan was talking about before. But I've shown you this thing before. But if you go out to regular expression.info, I think it is. It's going to give you virtually everything that you want. That's not it. All right. Regular expressions.info. That's it. Ugly site, but it works really well. And they have a thing in here for languages, tools and languages, but I don't know if they have anything. There's Java. I'm looking. There wouldn't be one, I wouldn't think, for ASP.NET, but there might be one for C#. There's a C and C++, so I don't know. All right. All right, then they've got a thing in here on how to create regular expressions, and those are the common things that you'd use.
Is that what you were talking about, like matching an IP address?
No, when I was talking about matching an IP address, literally there are ways that you can go in, you can capture the IP address of somebody who's like coming into your site. All right, and that's what I'd want to capture. But then there's got to be some kind of a program that says, okay, I've got this IP address, and basically I want to run a scan on it, for lack of better words, to find out where in the United States or where in the world it's coming from. All right. No, I don't think it'd be something that you could sit down and do in a class period. I mean, he's thinking about it. He might be able to do it in a class period. He's not sure. He's not sure. All right. So they give you some examples of regular expressions here. And here's, you asked about this. It says, if none of the validators provide the data validation your program requires, you can use a custom validator. And like I said, in my opinion, probably by using regular expressions, you could do virtually anything you could do in a custom validator. I can't imagine that you couldn't. All right? But they've got a couple special properties here, value and is valid. These are they're very similar to ones we've used before. All right, another new thing that's in here starting on 264, but I'm going to turn to 265, is what's called, it's right here, it's called the validation summary. Sometimes, now notice what they're doing right here. They have validators here. Everybody see these? They have validators there, and they give you messages, and they have a summary. Sometimes what you see is, rather than that, what they'll do is any field that's a required field or whatever that has a validator, you'll put a red asterisk there. And then if you do something illegal or leave it off, then all you get is this. A lot of people consider it to be overkill to have both text for your validators and a validation summary. All right, but it depends on the company, it depends on the person. Oh yeah, I mean, you still see it, but there are also people who think that they're, that possibly it's insulting their intelligence, because not only are you telling me I'm wrong, you're telling me I'm wrong twice. All right. So as it says, this validation summary control displays the summary of the error messages. Believe it or not, I believe by default it goes on the bottom, but you can put it on the top as well. You probably can use CSS and do other things with it too. I don't know. These are your options. The default is display your items as a bullet list. You can have them as a non-bulletized list, or you can put them in a paragraph. You can put header text in front of it. All right. Notice there's a show summary and a show message box. Both of these Both of these are Booleans, and with the show message box, basically what you're doing, typically if you're going to use the show message box, you do that on the client side because it looks like regular JavaScript. All right.
And so that's whenever you do the shopping cart deal, are you sure you wish to remove this?
That would be a place you could do that. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that this could be used. All right, the validation group, believe it or not, it's what I mentioned to you already, and that's this. Let's see. They're going to show. They're going to show it in just a minute. All right, but that's where they'll have that checkbox that says same as the billing address type of thing. All right, we'll see that in just a minute. All right, so they talk here about validation groups, and notice what they have. I don't know if that's a great example, but they've got a bunch of cities that are on the West Coast and a bunch of cities that are on the East Coast. I don't know, is that a great example? I don't even know. But it's the example that they've used. So they define, I think they're just trying to show you, and that was what the author came up with. Yeah. A validation group is a group of validators that run when a page is posted. So you can force several things to run. To group them, as it says, you set the validation group property as is shown right there. All right, so the end of the chapter, a checkout page that uses validation controls. If we look right here, all right, now notice they've got the valid email address, and they've also got an email retry. Why they used email instead of password? They did. I have never seen a thing where they ask you to put your email address in twice. Maybe you have. There are many places today that for your login, they're using your email address. All right, it's much easier for them. Think about why they would do that. Because they're only storing it once then. All right, they might be using it in two places. It's used in login, and it's used if they ask you for your email address. But, all right, it's only being stored in one place. And it makes sense to do that too, because typically it's not something you're going to forget. And you'll notice with the phone number, okay, why is that flagged? Because notice the last thing, there's not 4 digits, there's 5 there. All right, and we've got a required field there for state, even though it's a drop down. But they've got the first option is empty, as they show right there. And the shipping, there's what I showed you before, the billing and the shipping.
You disable the input, right, on that.
On the shipping, if this is,
you hit the same as,
if you check it, yes, you can disable it. I mean, there's different ways you can do it too. What I'd probably do is if you check that, I would just fill it in for you, and then I would, at least temporarily, I would change it to read only, so you couldn't change it. But there's a lot of ways you could do. Like you said, you could gray it out. There's a lot of different ways that you could handle it. That's why it's really important when you're working on stuff like that that you keep in constant communication with the person that you are creating the application for. Because just because you think it looks really good some way, they're the ones paying for it. And they may or may not agree with that. So here's the ASPX code that goes with it. Again, the author has done a pretty good job. I know it's gray in your book, but of showing you the new stuff. Notice that when you just chose email address, it wrote all this for you. All right, so it wrote the pattern for you. There's an example of a compare to for the email. And I just want to say something too, and I think this is sort of what Ethan was talking about before, but when I mentioned before about that integer versus double for the year, and you said, but it's a drop down, have you ever noticed that if you run a sophisticated form, every place the user typically can have a drop down, they put a drop down in? Why do they do that? Why do they put all those drop downs in? Yeah, so you don't screw it up. I mean, in some fields, it's going to be hard, if not impossible, to do that. A person's name or their address, all right? But there are a lot of ways that you can set things up to really automate it for the user, and that's what you should always be shooting for. So the code behind is shown here. starting on page 273. And again, it says if it's not a postback, what are you doing? You're grabbing everything that's in the customer session variable, you're casting it to type customer, and you're putting it into the customer. All right? So that's going to basically load everything that you put in for the customer. What does that mean? Address, name, address, city, state, zip type of stuff. There are things in there that are more database specific, but ideally at least you're able to look at that stuff and hopefully it's starting to make some sense to you. All right? So again, what we will do tomorrow is we will go over the end of chapter exercises for both chapter 7 and for chapter 8. In fact, I've got to see if I've got the starter file for you for chapter 7 and or for chapter 8. I'll find those and I'll walk over and let you copy those right now. But it'll take a minute for me to go search that stuff. I don't know if I've got it or not. I never looked at it before. So